Whether you're a performance athlete who needs to manage their weight, or an individual looking to either gain weight or even lose body fat, understanding what weight fluctuations are, how they occur, and why they occur is super important so that you can set up the right expectations for the next nutrition phase you're about to head into. Join myself and Coach Dalton as we talk about weight fluctuations.
Hey everyone, Coach Dean here. I'm here with the magnificent Coach Dalton. And today we're catching up to discuss times in which our bodies may fluctuate in weight, either unexpectedly or expectedly, depending on, I suppose, how you understand what's going on physiologically in the body. And we're going to talk about a few different times, like nutritional times that you may expect that your weight may change, some training times, and also potentially some sex kinds in regards to male versus female.
Fun.
So we're going to kick it off, I think, with some nutritional ones, and then we'll move into training, and then we'll move into female changes in body weight, and then we'll go from there. So, Dolce, do you want to kick it off? What are some of the nutritional times that we may expect or unexpectedly see some changes in weight? And then we can delve into what the mechanisms are behind that.
Yeah, for sure. Alrighty, hey everyone. So Coach Dalton here, if you are unfamiliar with myself. And it's a cool question, Dean. I think it's something that we obviously have heaps of clients address us about, if not just clients, but everyone asking us in emails and Facebook messages and forums and stuff like that. So it's obviously something pretty prominent. Some nutritional times that you can see changes, unexpected changes in weight gains. We're looking around refeeds once they're implemented, changing in diet type, going from potentially a high fat or a general even standard Australian diet to a high carb or a low carb diet. We can see some unexpected phases of weight gain there. Addition of supplements such as creatine and water, or changing up in meal timings, maybe going from a typical 3 meals a day to something like intermittent fasting.
Yeah, cool. Even time of meal in regards to how much food you want to consume at nighttime there. Yeah. And I suppose the number one question we get when we see these changes in whether or not they are going from intermittent fasting to a 5 meal a day diet, whether or not they're going from a normal diet to keto, that's the big one we see, or whether or not they're even hitting a refeed. And people may ask, why am I hitting a refeed? A refeed, for those that haven't seen our refeed videos just yet, being a time in which we eat a larger quantity of carbohydrates in order to try and refacilitate some energy restoration and potentially to support some psychological and physiological health. Is the weight gain they're seeing fat, or what's going on in different phases? Let's hit keto and say, all right, we go from normal westernized diet, reasonable amount of carbohydrates, reasonable amount of protein, semi-reasonable amount of fats. They take all the carbohydrates out and they get this amazing amount of fat loss. Mm-hmm. Or do they?
Well, yeah, that's a question. Do they? So generally when they change from a diet type, so like something like this standard Australian diet to keto like that reduction in carbohydrates comes with a massive drop in body weight. But no, I wouldn't say it's body fat, especially something that happens so rapidly over the course of a couple of days, unless you have a high energy expenditure or you go from a ridiculous amount of calories that you're consuming down to a nice standard, which would have to be over 3,500 calories per day to get close to half a pound of fat. Unless if hitting those criteria, it's not actually going to be fat gain. And that's obviously something that we want to account for the inverse as well, as unless that's being consumed, you're not going to have that fat gain going on. So that shift in weight that's going on, and it's definitely not a shift in body fat, but what we're seeing is actually a reduction in local glycogen stores within the body. So that's a carbohydrates that we store within our muscle cells and within our liver. So we're seeing a reduction in them just due to the overall restriction that we're having going from a standard Australian diet to a keto diet.
Cool. Yep. So we're seeing a reduction in body weight, not body fat.
Indeed, definitely.
Pretty straightforward. What about somebody who's gone and had a large meal at nighttime? Let's say they've eaten off their diet and they've changed the actual food type. I think we maybe can delve into even potentially some effects of increase in fiber intake or a decrease in fiber intake.
Yeah, sure. So
change in electrolyte balance, for that matter, for that type of meal too.
Yep. So there's actually even more macro on fiber and electrolytes with fats and protein. So going from something that you prescribed for a diet plan or something that you usually consume to changing that and going off plan, and changing that, which has a massive inflow on the change of digestion time. Protein is something that slows down and is digested rather slowly. It's not the fastest nutrient compared to carbohydrates. Where that can sit in your stomach, and as it takes longer to break down, When it's coupled with fats, it actually can take even longer, as fats slow gastric emptying. So we actually get this really controlled reduction of food release over hours, comparatively to what you've been doing before. If that's an increase, if that's a decrease, you may see some time in speeding up. Then inversely with that, if you have a large amount of vegetable intake that you normally would have on of a nighttime, and you swap that out for something off plan, maybe you've had some macas or something like that, that big reduction in fiber as well is going to see a slow in digestion time, digestion moving from the stomach into the bowels. So by going from an adequate amount of fiber that you can have with one meal up to 10 grams, depending on how much veggies and stuff that you're having, you can see a radical reduction in digestion time that can happen. If the meal is without fiber, it can even slow right down, so that you're actually retaining this heavier weight the following day because it's not being moved along by fiber, as well as being coupled with proteins and fats that are slowed that digestion down. So it's slowed down over the course of the night, which may impair your eating habits for the next day as well. And then as well as that, we've got stuff like electrolytes. So reduction in sodium or increase in sodium being the first and foremost one that comes to mind. And then potassium potentially after that. Magnesium would be the third one. Those three, a change in those three would have an impact on the water retention that you have, as well as some of the energy or cellular balance that goes on.
Yeah, so we're looking at actual volume of food, volume of fluid retention, volume of water retention, and a volume of waste sitting within the actual system that hasn't either cleared yet or is still struggling to move.
For sure. I mean, for fat gain, and where it's really not, it's just, unfortunately, you just ate a meal off plan and it takes longer to digest.
Yeah. And then I think one of the other ones we can talk about just very quickly, but it's essentially on the same terminology of what's going on there, is refeeds. Refeeds are a really interesting one in that, depending on the person and depending on the phase of dieting they're in, we can actually see both a weight gain or even a potential weight loss after a momentary intake of excessive calories or more calories or maintenance calories. So some of the things, the underlying things that are going on in a refeed is similar to what Dalton's spoken about before, is we're getting an increase in actual carbohydrates, both consumed and stored as glycogen in either liver or muscle, which is going to coincide with some extra weight, because glycogen is essentially carbohydrates attached to water. So it would make perfect sense that if we increase our carbohydrates momentarily for the day, we store more carbohydrates, we store more water, we store more volume, therefore we gain weight. And you could theoretically do some pretty simple maths on that to determine how much we would expect a client to gain weight. But in the instances of people gaining excessive weight or losing weight, I would argue or probably expect that if somebody is gaining excessive weights on a refeed, it's more than likely due to the coupling of both the increase in carbohydrates and the change in electrolyte status that you've just mentioned. We're almost looking at the three factors that we just discussed prior in all of the other food changes. We're looking at a potential change in actual muscle or glycogen weight through stored carbohydrates alongside water. We're looking at a potential change in transient gut motility due to maybe using higher or lower fiber foods to get those high carbohydrates in. And then similarly, we may also be looking at hydration factors in that the electrolyte balance may have also changed. So a refeed for somebody who is otherwise relatively well fed may see quite an excessive weight gain because of the threefold factor of that particular refeed. Conversely, though, I think we could delve really quickly into why somebody may see an actual weight reduction, maybe not the immediate day after a refeed, but potentially the 2 and 3 and 4 days after, but potentially the day after too. You want to maybe delve into some of the thought process behind why we may see a weight gain versus a weight loss.
Cool. So yeah, with the weight gain, essentially one thing that I'd add to it is also typically we find that people that are higher in body fat percentage don't respond as well to a refeed as those that are lower in body fat percentage. And that can have a heavier increase than you would expect outside of the roughly calculated however many grams with however many amounts of water as well that you'd associate with it. So essentially it could just be that maybe they haven't depleted glycogen stores enough to even be recipient of all the carbohydrates that are coming in, so it's just spilling over potentially there. Then with the weight loss, it's a really weird one because a lot of people freak out when they start eating more food, and then it doesn't make sense to them that we've been telling them calories in, calories out for so long that that now they can eat more food and drop this weight, and it really blows their mind. But I've got to look at the body not just as a calculator. It's this massive system that has a lot of like influences, and it sends out all these different signals, and these, you know, hormonal as well as electrical and chemical that go around the whole body. So when you have a increase in carbohydrates coming in, or a refeed, essentially what happens is we get this hormonal response in a reduction in cortisol, because the body stops stressing. The leptin hormone and the molecule, the hormone that's transmitting to the brain how much body fat that we have, that also gets at least down regulated. It stops being released as much after consistent days of refeeding. So you get a relationship between those two happening. The cortisol drop actually retains a little bit of water. Cortisol in itself increases aldosterone and antidiuretic hormone, which are the ones that help fluctuate and control our water balance within the body system. So cortisol having an impact on that. If that drops, then we get a drop of water retention. Essentially, the body, when dieting, feels like it's slowly starving. So it will try and create a way in which it can retain as much body weight as possible, but also water being one of the most important things, especially being composed of about 70% water. So with that, the body will inflame. I hate that word, but it is a response to the stresses that are going on. So by releasing that stress, by having a single day refeed, 2 day, 3 day refeed, what's going on is you tell the body that essentially you're not going to die. It's okay to drop a little bit of water. And with that drop of water, we see a reduction in body weight.
Cool. Yeah, it's I don't want to delve too far into the inflammation side of things, but obviously it's a necessary evil to particular things. But all people can think of inflammation is essentially a retention of fluid somewhere due to some form of stress, and the little minute time of increased calories that we potentially may put in through carbohydrates reduce stress, reduce body weight through fluid retention. And that's why it's either a gain or a loss.
For sure. And it kind of like what that does allow us to do is see exactly what the body's doing in periods of stress dieting, where cortisol could be masking, that weight retention could be masking essentially what's going on with the body. So we can make a better assessment of how someone's progressing with that as well. So it's not just refeeds having the psychological impact, they have a really important physiological place as well.
Absolutely. And we did a talk with, and when I say we, I mean me, we did a talk with Coach Allen on refeeds, how much, when to actually implement them, what kind of macronutrients you want to do. So for anyone that's listening to this one that hasn't had the opportunity to listen to that one, they now do. It's pretty in-depth. It's a really cool little coach chat. So jump over to that one after this one if you want to try and find out a little bit more about refeeds and what they actually are and how to implement them. Cool. So in a nutshell, if your weight varies after a moment of change in dietary conditions, whether it be food volume or food types or electrolyte status or hydration status, you are looking at an acute change in body weight, not an actual change in body fat. So worry less about it and instead utilize it as a piece of data that you can simply refer to as an expected change the next time you do the exact same thing. So it's not a negative. It's actually fantastic to see body weight change after dietary manipulation, because it gives us information on how that client responds. Just like you said, even something as simple as how quickly do they respond or how stressed was their system prior to a refeed. So do not worry. It's all okay.
Yeah. Unless you've done a complete day of fasting, essentially your adjustment to your diet hasn't caused enough of a reduction in calories that you've had a massive impact on fat loss.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Let's go training. I've just trained legs. Train legs. I'm absolutely annihilated them, because I'm that guy. Like, I like to get really sick when I train legs. And now I've woken up the next morning and I'm in a contest prep and, oh my God, my weight's gone up. What's happened?
Yeah, so we kind of covered a little bit of that in the last one, but yeah, it's definitely something that we see a lot of people do, especially when they train legs too close to comp day and they can't get them as lean as they need to, especially the glutes. So if we take a step back and we think about the body, our legs and our whole lower body, it comprises of about 45, 48% of our total body mass. It's got the largest muscle groups within the body, a lot of glycogen stores within the body, a lot of overall power output that you can do, so a lot of volume that you can work through those legs. Essentially, we spoke about inflammation a little bit just before, and this kind of comes back into this. When you're going up in weight, we are seeing a retention of water due to increase in muscle protein synthesis as that needs to happen for the body to recover and repair. It needs a little bit more water to happen. So yes, there's going to look like there's an increase in body weight, but essentially it's a retention of water for that recovery to occur, as well as depending on how you've utilized nutrition following that training program. If you then consumed a large amount of carbohydrates on that day or the next day, you're actually seeing an increased storage of glycogen within those areas just from the localized training effect. With that, then get increased water retention that comes with that. So not just from the inflammation side of it, but also the water storage that goes on with glycogen. So you're getting a compounding effect of both of those happening at the same time, freaking most people out.
Yeah. I don't really think there's too much to add there. Where it's a pretty simple and straightforward thing. Conversely, the same is also the exactly the same as if you go and do a large quantity of potentially activity through steps or actual specific deliberate cardio. We can see both a potential increase in inflammation if it's something like a modality that you haven't done for a while. For example, if I'm going to go and do hill sprints, I'm definitely going to get a lot of lower limb inflammation because my body's not used to it. Even more so if we do a lot of eccentrically loaded exercises, we'll generally see even greater inflammation. So that's something to be aware of with the modality of exercise. But then flip it on its head. I go and do a bunch of steps that don't cause too much inflammation. I do more activity. I do more of the washing at home. I wash my own clothes, all of that kind of stuff. Maybe I actually burn through a few more calories. Maybe I sweat a little bit more. Maybe I lose a little bit more hydration. And then I could see actual significant reduction in body weight too, which again is not acutely a large amount of body fat. Unless we're doing excessive change in a longer period of time, we're not really going to see actual body fat change. So I think that's nailed training in a nutshell.
Essentially, one of the things, and this is pretty much going to come back to nearly everything here, is if you're looking at changes day to day, it's not going to be fat. Unless you're doing some crazy protocols, it's really not going to be fat. It's we can explain the physiology behind it, but it's definitely not going to be fat.
Yeah. I think somebody that we both love to always reference, Broderick Chavez, it's average over time.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty simple.
Oh, yeah.
Do as much as you can consistently over time and then look at the average. So,
cool.
Nail training. We've done the nutritional aspect. I'm going to hand this one over to you because this is your jam. And just a brief overview. I don't think we can go too detailed on this one. It'll save a whole nother coach talk for that one. But some of the expected potential changes for females to be aware of throughout their cycle, whether it be through different phases, follicular versus luteal versus actual state of menses or whatever it may be. Let's just touch some overreaching ones that people may expect so that they're not at least getting to that phase, seeing a actual change in weight and freaking out thinking they've gained fat.
It's a pretty common one, but it's kind of something that obviously I face a lot when it comes to working with all the clients that I do. I've spent a fair amount of time trying to educate myself and make sure that I'm up to date with as much as I can be when it comes to the menstrual cycle. So it's definitely a little bit of my area. We'll let say that. So the menstrual cycle is pretty intense. It can be essentially something that makes or breaks a woman, essentially. Most of the time they find out the stuff that they're doing or have been tracking for their body weight. Once we start introducing education around the menstrual cycle, it kind of throws nearly everything that they thought they knew about their body out of the window. They kind of had an inkling of heaps of things going on, but once we identify some of the physiological stuff to it, it actually makes a lot more sense. So menstrual cycle, for those that don't know, it's pretty basic in that it's roughly 28 days. We have two phases. We have the follicular phase, which is pre-ovulation, pre-release of the egg, and then we have the luteal phase, which is pre-menses. So with that, we get shifting in different nutrients, nutrient partitioning over these times. As luteinizing hormone is nice and low, we get nice and even retention of water. We get nice even utilization of stuff like carbohydrates. And then as that starts to increase, we get a whole bunch of water retention going on. That'll start to happen a lot more around ovulation and menses. And in the 2 periods in between, kind of the early to late crossovers between the follicular and luteal phase, you'll see awesome utilization of water, awesome retention of glucose within the muscles. You'll see nice and happy women that aren't stressing about their body fluctuations and stuff that are going on, which also is a factor, as the psychological stress alone can add a water retention factor. So those are just basic influences of water retention across the menstrual cycle. There's some quick ones.
So we can expect to see a potential gain in weight at what phase? and then a potential regulation of weight potentially at what stage. And then obviously this is going to be heavily implemented by the things we've just discussed in nutrition and inflammation and so on. Not inflammation, sorry, nutrition and training causing inflammation. But if there is any potential ones that maybe they can look out for, at least be consciously aware of, that perhaps these may be the phases where you may benefit from potentially a lower stress-based training, maybe less volume, a little bit more intensity. I know this is not easy to answer, and the big answer is always it depends. But just sort of a very, very basic little pathway through there for them.
Cool. I found that if anything, I found that there's two different types of responders essentially. There are those that will respond poorly pre-ovulation, and then there are those that respond poorly pre-menstrual cycle. And by poorly, I mean just not to what they're used to. Not poorly as in they're not doing the right thing and their bodies aren't performing. But when it comes to weight training, we can see like heightened increases of like uncoordination coming into stuff like the menstrual cycle, or ovulation as well, depending on the person. Some people seem to be more sensitive to ovulation than they are menstruation. So those two areas are coming in. So around day 12 to 14, and day 26 to 28, maybe even a little bit earlier, depending on how sensitive your body is. But those are the times that you would expect to see weight increases, as well as the body's getting preparing for obviously the release of the egg or the shedding of the uteral lining. So there's going to be those water retention phases, but you also have days 1 through to 8 that are going to be really awesome in balancing out water manipulation, water retention and glycogen, and days 12 to 16 to 22, depending on the person, where they'll have a nice even water storage as well as less glycogen use, more fat use, but they'll be nice and even.
Cool. Sounds good. Sounds difficult, but sounds good.
Yeah, it can be, but essentially the big key thing to this is women take control of what's going on with your body by recording the stuff that's happening, so that you have an idea of the things that have impact you week to week, month to month. Absolutely.
And then the idea of having an awareness of the expectancy of change as you as an individual. I don't like the whole, as you don't like the word inflammation, I hate the one that's like what works for you is best, because there are some underlying and overreaching physiological things that we all just have to deal with. But in this instance, there's going to be some obviously variation between female, even the manipulation aspect of their hormones, if they're using birth control or anything like that, that's also going to have an impact. But if you can measure your change over time, then you know exactly what to expect, what not to expect. And then if we see things that are outside of the expectations, then maybe we delve deeper. But otherwise, having a nice, like you said, a measurement of what's going on, an understanding of what's going on, is going to potentially then also reduce the risk for even the psychological stress aspect of weight fluctuations and change, because you know exactly what to expect.
Yep, for sure. I think if I could equate the menstrual cycle to being like anything for guys to understand, it'd be imagining like going through a monthly cycle of your balls working, your balls not working, essentially expecting a whole different fluctuations of things to happen there, where hormones are dropping down because you don't need them to work, and then coming up because the body's trying to restart itself. Essentially, it's kind of like something like that. So for lean individuals and lean females, and men who've never had to really deal with too much variation in their menstrual cycle because it's nice and even, like it's not really as prominent, something that you don't need to consider, but for a lot of women out there, it is.
Yeah, great. Any final words you'd like to mention, mate, on weight fluctuations or unexpected weight fluctuations? The reality is they're actually not unexpected once you understand what's going on. But for those that are just looking at the arbitrary number on the scale, all I would say is that if you can track the data and understand what's going on with your physique, make measurable changes so that you can determine what's happening, then things like this should cause you less stress, and you should actually see a more linear fat loss or performance goal. So measure.
Yeah, you essentially said it before, and it's averages over time. Essentially, not looking at any single day in isolation. That's not the be-all, end-all of everything. Yes, there's an awesome amount of work. I'm a little bit weird in that if you don't like tracking your weight on the scale, we can take that approach and move forward from there, but there needs to be some form of measurement. But the research shows that it's really important to have some daily form of measurement. The most successful ones seem to be scale weight, and with that done over time, it gives people a better indication of what's going on with their body. So knowing what that average looks like over the course of a week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months. It gives you much better understanding, and you can expect these weight changes and understand them to a better level. But essentially, we're not getting fat loss that's happening this fast if there are unexpected weight changes.
Yeah, or fat gain.
Or fat gain.
Yeah, that's the one people are worried about. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So track your data. Like we said just then, I think that's actually a really cool point to finalize on, is that some measurement is necessary. And the more you can understand of what you can actually expect to be going on behind the scenes or under the hood, as some of the guys will say, then you should actually have less of an emotional attachment to the measurement data and instead just literally look at it objectively. So,
yeah, definitely.
That's Coach Dean and Dalton out. Hopefully this has helped you out in regards to some of the expected times or unexpected times that you can potentially see weight fluctuations, and maybe a little bit of a greater understanding as to what's going on under the hood as opposed to what you think is going on. It's not that bad. Continue on, keep working, and you'll be fine.
That's it.